what is up, it's JJ. On this video, I'll be going over my newest camera, which is a Hasselblad H5D with a 40 megapixel digital back. I've been using my Pentax 645Z medium format camera since 2015. It's been my workhorse and I've shot many projects and portraits with it exclusively with its 55 and 90mm lens. But I wanted to change things up. On the forum I frequently visit, a Hasselblad H5D with a 40 megapixel digital back was listed, and it was kind of too good of a deal to pass up. This digital medium format camera was $2,800 when it was over $27,000 in January 2013. So we're looking at a decade-old digital camera today. As of right now, the latest model is the H60, and with a 100 megapixel digital back, it's about $33,000. And if you're not familiar with Hasselblad and or Leica, they're expensive cameras in general because of their low production volume and generally higher quality materials. Basically, more metal than plastic. If you're an amateur photographer, generally people equate higher quality to a higher megapixel count, but as pros knows, that isn't always the case. Prior to making the decision of picking up this camera, I did what most people do, research. But surprisingly, I didn't find much info on H5D, especially on YouTube. The only good videos I found were from like 9 years ago when it essentially was new. And to be fair, buying an old ass digital camera today is generally not a great idea because of how much tech and sensor quality has improved. So in this video, I'm just going to give an overview of the H5D, and because I have another medium format, which is a Pentax 645Z, I can compare it to that both in design, overall use, and ultimately image quality. Spoiler alert, any image can look good with the right light, pose, model, location, wardrobe, hair, makeup, mood, Photoshop. Basically anything but the camera makes the image actually good. So why did I get this old camera that can be easily outpaced by any modern digital camera? And if the quality of an image lends itself to anything and everything but the camera? Because it's beautiful, it's big, it's heavy, has a stainless steel body, shit feels like it should make good images. But for real though, perception does matter in this world, and while the new iPhone 15 Pro with its 48 megapixels will most likely have similar image qualities in the same lighting conditions, there's nothing like holding and using a real photographer's tool. So continue to watch if you want to see a quick overview of this Hasselblad H5D. Let's move the Pentax over. Spec-wise, 40 megapixels, raw 16-bit color definition, 32.9 by 43.9 millimeter CCD sensor. All you camera nerds know the difference between CCD and CMOS sensors. Look it up. And true focus tech, which means that after you focus lock, this camera only has one autofocus point, by the way. After you frame your composition, true focus will try to ensure that its intended focus area stays in focus no matter how much you move your camera left, right, up, and down, but not forward and back. Now, let's talk about the body. Overall, this thing is pretty heavy. I don't know the exact weight, so I'm gonna go ahead and flash. I don't know what the metal used exactly with the Pentax 645Z, but it's definitely not as heavy as this guy. There's basically 5 components in the Hasselblad system, obviously one being the lens. The next is the actual body in itself. Then you have the prism that you can take out. Then you have the digital back, which you can also remove. This model being the 40 megapixels, there is a 50 and 60 variant. And as mentioned, currently there's a 100 megapixel back. And the last part, which is really, really cool to me, is the battery grip. Literally, the battery is the grip. There's a little lever right here. You press that and you would take this thing out to swap for a new battery. Now, right away, that one thing I wish that almost all camera bodies use is this thing right here in terms of the battery grip. Now, for most digital cameras or DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, especially because they are small, you can get a battery grip, which you would attach to the bottom of the camera, has a 3.5 millimeter on the bottom, and then you would screw that in, and now you can go ahead and extend that grip of your camera body. But this in itself, the battery just being the grip, just makes total sense. One side note, these batteries, just like the Leicas, are super expensive, basically around $300 per battery. As far as button layout, here's a quick tour. Shutter is over here. There is no threaded shutter, so it's not like you'd be able to use a cable release and put it over here. There is a wheel over here for your index finger. Then over here for your thumb, you can go ahead and adjust settings right over there. So typically shutter and aperture you can control from that dial. On the top right here, there is like this old, I don't know, dot matrix LCD screen. I can go ahead and turn this on right now. You can go ahead and light it up, which is kind of cool. Very old school, reminds me of like a Timex watch. Flash button, autofocus point, meaning, or rather mode, meaning you can only turn it on, and also single Next, you have the flash button over here. Then you have the autofocus button. So that basically is single lock, continuous, and then manual. ISO, white balance, the menu, and then you would turn it on and off with this button. It's my least favorite part of this design because it's not like a hard switch. I feel like this thing could probably be accidentally be pressed on. But again, I've only been using this for 3 days, so what do I know? I mentioned to you that true focus, you would go ahead and engage that over here. There is an auto exposure lock. Surprisingly, there's a button right here to format your card. I don't think there's any camera system that I know that has a dedicated button on the camera somewhere where you can press it. It is like a little bit depressed, if you can see that. So it takes a little bit effort, but it's kind of interesting. I wish it was like maybe covered or something like that, or has another lock. But of course, after you press it, you'd have to confirm on the screen anyway to go ahead and format the card. But it does make it simply easier, you know, before and I would say before a shoot to format your card. On the Prism itself, there is exposure compensation, and then you have the diopter if you wear glasses and you can look inside the viewfinder. And on the back here with the digital back, the LCD screen is old. I mean, even though it's not that far apart in terms of age between this body and the 645Z, the LCD screen here just really sucks. The quality wise, it's not great. It looks very like low contrast and whatnot. But if it serves its purpose to just let you know that, hey, the image that you captured is saved onto the memory card, then it does this thing. But for you to review it, you can go ahead and zoom right here if you can see that, making sure. And then there's like a view where it zooms out, kind of like an iPad where you pinch to zoom out to see more images. And these are some images I shot here for a project that I'm doing using this camera and photographing other creators in the building that I am at. In terms of connectivity, this thing being an old uses FireWire 800. So there's a port right here that you plug in your cable in order for you to shoot tethered. Now, from my experience with the Pentax, it does work tethering, and what I did like about it and mentioned in my review of it, my 5-year review that I posted 2 years ago, is that it's still relevant today because it does have USB 3.0. Now, for this camera, it being FireWire 800, there's a few hurdles in order for me to shoot tethered. I haven't tried it yet, but I did buy the right adapters to do so. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's basically a FireWire 800 into a FireWire 800 to Thunderbolt 2 adapter. Then you take that Thunderbolt 2 adapter into a Thunderbolt to a USB-C adapter in order for me to plug it into my Mac Studio. So I haven't tried it out yet, but theoretically, it should work. I hope so. Last thing about the design is that on the very bottom, there is a tripod mounting plate, as most cameras do. One thing that's nice about with the Pentax is that on the side, it actually has an additional mounting point. So if you are so used to shooting vertical portraits, you don't have to mount your camera horizontally and then use your ball head to go ahead and put it to the side. You can literally just mount it straight onto a tripod with that other connecting point over there. Now let's talk about the Pentax design. So for the Pentax 645Z, it has almost like a traditional DSLR feel, meaning you have the grip over here, you have your thumb, your index finger and your thumb scroll wheels over here. That on and off switch is that lever, as I mentioned. Also doesn't have a threaded cable release, but then again, to be fair, that is more of an old school where we'd be using film. There is reasons to use a threaded cable release, but for most portrait photographers in the modern era, they don't necessarily need it. Exposure compensation ISO makes it a lot easier to change. And then it also has dedicated buttons in a traditional 4-way, directional pad. So I have my continuous shooting modes, white balance, flash, and then image profile. One nice thing about the LCD of this camera is that it does articulate. So from the side, you can go ahead and put it out over there. So this thing, again, is still more relevant today because of that design, and it does have live view. So I can turn this thing on right now, press and hold the live view button, and now I can kind of shoot almost like a waist finder, again, like an old school camera where you would be looking down in order to record an image. So this really does help if you had any like hard to reach angles like close to the floor, or if you're working with kids, you can go ahead and put this on a lower level near your waist, as opposed to a traditional viewfinder that you have to put your eye in to see the image. Just like a DSLR, there's some mode dials here, manual, and then your aperture and shutter priority modes. And then you have the user memory presets, so 1, 2, and 3. So that is nice if again, you are so used to having some presets. Last thing on the very top here is you have dedicated buttons for RAW, autofocus, you can lock the camera, and then you have bracketed shooting as well. As mentioned on the side right here, you have that plate, or rather that 3.5 millimeter, so you can attach a plate here if you want to use this as a dedicated for vertical mode, for mounting it at least on the tripod. On the very bottom, you also have that plate as well for your tripod. So still feels great. It's definitely chunky, not as heavy, because I feel like there is metal in here, but generally it's just lighter than the Hasselblad. The Pentax also has an LCD screen on the very top of the camera. There is also a light that you can use just like the Hasselblad. So again, you have all of your usual pertinent information at a glance available to you. So auto white balance, your shutter, ISO, aperture, exposure, and how many remaining images you can take on your memory card. Now let's talk about the shutter. Again, most camera nerds love to know what that shutter sound is. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a shot with the Pentax and then the Hasselblad. Here is the Pentax 645Z. And now on to the Hasselblad. And if you saw that light, by the way, the Hasselblad body has like an autofocus assist lamp. Most cameras do have that. The Pentax has it as well, but it's usually like a, not an infrared light, but it's almost like an amber light that kind of shines just to give you the camera enough ability to focus on it. The Hasselblad system is very interesting. It uses like a barcode readout. So if your surface was flat, you technically can ensure that it would focus correctly. I don't know how it works, but it should work. One thing that both cameras share is that they're both slow in terms of their frames per second count. Pentax is a little bit faster at around 3 frames per second, and the Hasselblad is at a 1.1. So definitely anything but portraits and landscape and still life or product is what its intended audience and user is for. One last thing about these cameras in terms of flash use, because that's how I personally shoot. I love shooting with strobes as opposed to natural light, is its flash sync speed. That's important because if you're shooting anything like action, you want to make sure that your shutter in itself is fast enough to stop that action, you know, independent of being able to use flash. When you are using flash, most cameras will have a high, or rather a sync speed in order to use flash properly. So with the Pentax, it is definitely slow at 125th of a second, and the Hasselblad, I want to say, one nice thing that I love immediately about the Hasselblad over the Pentax is its viewfinder. I can't really show you a good way on camera right now, but just trust me that the viewfinder on the Hasselblad is massive. Like, again, I prefer shooting with the Pentax from the very get-go. I know right now that EVFs are really great because it's literally what you see, because you're just looking at like a computer monitor and all your settings are reflected in that image. But for me, I just love the fact that it's void of it. There's no distractions, and I'm able to personally being able to connect in real time with that subject in front of me. In terms of image quality, I'm actually using both of these cameras on set for a project I'm producing. I'm actually doing portraits with a Hasselblad, and then right after, I'm shooting it with a Pentax in order to compare. So right away, as I mentioned, you kind of can't really tell in terms of the quality differences from it. While this camera is about 51 megapixels compared to a 40 megapixel, honestly, you can't really tell. I'm gonna go ahead and show an image right now that are shot from both of these cameras, and I'm gonna go ahead and let you guess as far as which is what. And here are the answers as far as which camera shot which image. And again, All of the image quality kind of comes down to basically your use and understanding of light. And then after that, or even before that, is your subject matter, your background, your location, and things like that. But again, I wanted to show real quick on screen, or rather for this video, what that difference looks like, if you can't see any, between these two cameras. And really, they're both great. All cameras are great these days. What I will say in terms of using these cameras in the field is that with the Pentax, what I saw through the viewfinder was pretty much what I saw on the LCD screen when I was reviewing the images. As opposed to the Hasselblad, when I look into the viewfinder, I'm of course framing intentionally. I'm making sure that it's composed as best as possible to my ability at that given time. But when I reviewed the images on the digital back, they were slightly off. And so I ended up having to kind of compensate for that difference while taking photos. So for me, I was a little bit more disconnected when using the camera, only because of that difference in the actual image that was being saved, as opposed to what I actually saw in the viewfinder, even though it is a beautiful, big ass viewfinder. The Hasselblad is big and it's slow and it's perfect for sessions that are intentional or product shoots where you obviously have total control. I don't do street, kids, sports, or event photography, which all of that would benefit from faster autofocus with multiple autofocus points and a higher frame per second count. Maybe it's because the older I get, the more deliberate I am becoming with my photography. And yes, while it is just a tool and you can choose to be slow and deliberate with any camera, sometimes a tool with restrictions and void of features you won't use or need will help you focus on what you truly want to make. This decade-old camera is impractical in terms of what you're actually getting for the price you're paying, but this looks good and feels good as f